We do it before all the big competitions. We did it before the World Cup. We did it before the GEA season. We did it at the start of 2019, where basically we get the hottest of the hot takes that are available. And we've got two of the hottest chefs cooking up some hot takes today. We've got John Duggan in the blue corner and Phil Egan in the red corner. Are you ready, guys? Because this is going to put your reputation on the line. We're not going to ask you with question number one who's going to win the Premier League title, because I think we all think Manchester City is going to win the Premier League title. So question number one is, will this year's title race be more or less dramatic than last season? Phil?
Less dramatic. And I was thinking back to, was it really dramatic at the end? Because City, we knew they were just going to win. Maybe the drama was that there was no drama, that both teams just were relentless. But they're not going to reach the same amount of points. But I agree with what you said before you asked me the question, that City will win the league, and I think it'll be a bit more comfortable this time.
Less dramatic because Kevin De Bruyne is almost like a new signing for City. 1,000 minutes is less than that, I think, that he played in the Premier League last season, and he is just such a player. I think like it's such a top player for me. I love Kevin De Bruyne. I love the way he plays football. Rodri's a big addition for Manchester City. Liverpool, they were brilliant last season. Only lost to one game, but can they keep that up? Get like the three lads who were playing in the summer. I know Oxlade-Chamberlain and Gomez are back, but Klopp's teams play with such intensity, and maybe City have just got a deeper squad. I think it'll be City and Liverpool top two clearly, but it won't be as tight, I don't think. There's only two things to City that I would question. First of all, Vincent Kompany's not his defensive leadership, but his leadership generally, and also the issue around the Champions League, because if they're going into deep March, April, May, will they be able to cope with both fronts? And that's the only thing that could make them a little bit vulnerable. But I think City will win the league more comfortably this season.
Our second question this morning is, which manager is going to win the sack race?
Okay, this I think depends a lot on what happens before 5 o'clock. If Wilfried Zaha is no longer a Palace player come 5 o'clock, Roy Hodgson wins it for me. And then the other person I think is in the sack race, Graham Potter. Because it's all well and good getting rid of Chris Hughton, but you've brought in a manager who wants completely different football played, and can you get across to your players within a few weeks how you want them to play, and can they execute it? And if they can't, and they take a few beatings early on, then people will say, oh, Graham Potter maybe isn't the man for Brighton.
Right, Graham Potter, one to watch. Would you go along with that, John, or have you got some different names?
The thing about it is, if Ashley's going to back, say, Steve Bruce, surely Tony Bloom is going to back Graham Potter, because the way he unceremoniously got rid of Chris Hughton towards the end of last season. So surely if Potter's his guy, then he's going to give him some time. How stubborn, like this is the thing, how stubborn does a chairperson get? I suppose Newcastle is a special case, isn't it?
Yeah, he's the most stubborn of them all.
Yeah, so maybe that Brighton are a bit more pragmatic. It's all about saving, your existence in the Premier League. I would agree with Phil. I think Roy Hodgson will become under pressure if Zaha goes, if they make a bad start. But Solskjaer, for me, whether he's first to go. Also, like if anybody's like doing a bet out there as well, this is important to know. Like not to be first to be sacked or first to leave. You need to know what the criteria are, because you need to be very clear. Like because somebody could leave but not be sacked. So
mutual consent.
Yeah. Do they win the sack race? So I think it's generally when you're looking at these things, who's first to leave? Because Jose Mourinho, I think, was 33 or 50 to 1 when he left Chelsea in 2007. Nobody expected it. I know those tensions, but he was the first to go. So I think Hodgson is vulnerable. I actually don't think Bruce is vulnerable at the moment, but I think Solskjaer should be vulnerable if it doesn't start going well for Manchester United. But once again, if Manchester United get rid of Solskjaer, say before Christmas, where does it leave them? It really leaves them in a tricky position. Are you allowed to give answers here for the burning questions? Or are you just completely?
I'm going to start siding with you. Like I'm kind of liking your take on Manchester City in question one about the lack of Vincent Kompany this year. That being said, I think my take on that is that Liverpool have a better chance of finishing third than they do finishing first. I'm sorry to say that to any Liverpool fans, but that's my take on that. On the second question here, I think Solskjaer is a good shout. I really do think he's a good shout. Roy Hodgson, though, seems to be the trendy answer to this question at the moment, and he is the manager who most people think is going to win the sack race. He's getting a bit of money as well in the markets, I understand. And Roy Hodgson, Steve Bruce, Solskjaer, they're the three for me that are going to be in the mix for the sack race. Question number 3. Now, this would have been a more interesting question, I think, a couple of weeks ago, because Arsenal have suddenly got their act together in the transfer market. The question is, will the top 6 get cracked this season?
I don't think so. I agree. I think Arsenal would have been the most vulnerable a few weeks ago. Now I kind of look at United being the most vulnerable, but you'd still think United are going to finish ahead of the likes of Everton, Leicester and Wolves. Now, the gap could be a lot closer, but I'd be very surprised if there was a difference in the top 6.
What about the money Everton has spent, John? Like, do you think they're going to finish 7th? And do you think they can crack the top 6?
I think a team can crack the top 6 by progressing slightly, but the reason I think a team could crack the top 6 is Chelsea's weakness. Lack of signings, Lampard, who knows what's going to happen with Lampard. What happens if it all starts going wrong for Lampard earlier on? Like, how do the fans react in the first 10 weeks of the season if it doesn't start going well for Lampard at Chelsea? I think he's shown leadership in the Louise question, but they're pretty thin. And Hazard, like, such a huge player for Chelsea, like the best player in the league. And if anybody's going to crack the top 6, I think it's going to be because of the weakness of other teams. And I think Chelsea are the weakest team. So it is quite a 50-50 one for me. And I think,
but if you were to call it now, will Chelsea finish below 6?
Yes.
Right. That is our first really steaming hot take this morning on...
Well, you know, we've been waiting, I don't know, 3.5 hours, but we got 17 hours here of content on Off the Ball. So, like, we've a lot to get through, but that's the first hot take from John Duggan. Chelsea, look, we don't like Chelsea anyway, but Chelsea are going to struggle with Frank Lampard. This is just too fairy tale for me, and I think that United, to be fair, have made some good signings defensively. United's big thing is, can they reach the top 4? But the top 4 is clearly, you know, making itself apparent for me.
Next question is, which of the new teams, which of last year's promoted teams from the Championship will finish highest in this season's Premier League? I'm going to get the ball rolling here, and I'm saying that if you spend over £120 million on players, you have to finish the highest of the promoted teams. Aston Villa.
Yeah, I would go for Villa, not because of all the money they've spent, but some of the signings that they have brought in, like they've played either for Villa last season or they've played for Dean Smith. So he doesn't, they keep getting referred to, you know, they could be this season's Fulham, but Fulham just threw a load of money at players that didn't fit into a system. Dean Smith, as I said, he knows players that he signed or he scouted. They know how he wants them to play. And Jack Grealish, because of Jack Grealish is like such a talented player. All the Declan Rice talk, for me, it was actually Jack Grealish was the bigger loss not to get capped for the Republic of Ireland, because he can run a game, pick a pass, very good goal scorer as well. So, and I think Villa are probably the best place of the 3.
It's a good point. I think you can actually take all of Aston Villa's signings and make a starting 11 from them alone. They've signed all around the pitch. They haven't just lumped into the market and thrown them all into the squad. What way are you going, John?
Aston Villa. I mean, I think, you know, just by common sense, if you spend that amount of money, you got to be the top team. Norwich has spent nothing, and Sheffield United, you know, Armendi's people's tip for 20th. I don't think it'll be as straightforward as that. But, like, from a common sense perspective, I think you're looking at Villa, but you're not looking at a Wolves situation where they're going to be 7th or 8th or 9th. You're looking at them being maybe 13th or 14th. But I think they'll be the best of the 3.
Okay, let's move on. Of last year's Premier League teams, John Duggan, which one is going to finish the lowest?
I think Brighton. I think Brighton will struggle. I would say Newcastle will struggle as well, but I think Brighton will struggle. Struggle for goals. You know, I'm surprised that Lewis Duncan's hasn't been snapped up, but I thought they really struggled towards the end of last season. And this is the thing with Chris Hughton now. You know, Chris Hughton, he's not a fashionable manager, but he did the job with them. And I know Graham Potter's a bit left field, but I do think they're really going to struggle.
I have Brighton down as well, because they didn't score enough goals, and I just don't know if Graham Potter is going to be able to implement his tactics on that squad that he has. They're used to playing a certain way, and also as well, like, winning becomes a habit, but also like losing also becomes a habit as well. And can you keep relying on...
They got some real thumpings.
Like,
I mean, I know they played well at Arsenal, actually even at Spurs. They got some real thumpings. I think Bournemouth absolutely thumped them.
5-0,
if I remember, like towards the end of last season, and that is a worry.
But what about if we actually look at Newcastle and we look at, I know you've mentioned them in passing, but you think Brighton are going to finish lower than them. I think you look at this improvement from last season, and I'm not talking about personnel, I'm talking about on the sideline.
But Paredes gone.
Yeah, okay. But taking the fact that you're reducing Benitez to Steve Bruce, I don't care about any squad reduction. That is the big. I love Chris Hughton as a manager. I think he's brilliant, but that is the biggest step back in any player or any manager in any off-season. So I think Newcastle has to be the worst of last season's Premier League teams.
And logic would suggest